am delighted to welcome everyone to this very special event. My name is Anne-Marie Evans and I'm the Head of School for Humanities here at York St John University, and we're really happy that you're all able to join us today. So thank you so much for coming along. I want to start by offering a very special welcome to our guest of honour, Matthew Barzun, who has very kindly agreed to talk to us about his hugely impressive career. He has a varied and very rich experience as a businessman, a diplomat, a published author, and a political fundraiser. And Matthew, as I'm sure you know, served as the US ambassador to Sweden and then later as ambassador to the UK from 2013 to 2017. Upon returning to the US, Matthew received the Marshall Medal from the Marshall Aid Commemoration Commission, created by British Parliament for his dedication to strengthening US and British relations. Most recently, he has authored The Power of Giving Away Power, How the Best Leaders Learn to Let Go, which is published by HarperCollins in the UK. And the leadership book describes how to build cultures of collaboration by adopting the habits and behaviours of interdependence. So I'm hoping we can hear a little bit more about that today. And we're certainly very, very excited to hear more about Matthew and some of his experiences. I'm also very pleased to be able to welcome two of my York St John colleagues. So we've got Dr. Chris Kirkland, Senior Lecturer in Politics, and Dr. Ian Horwood, Senior Lecturer in History and American Studies. So thank you to both Chris and Ian for being here as well. And finally, a few housekeeping items for everyone. So you should be able to see that the captions are on. Just be warned, they are automatically done, so they might not always be 100% accurate, so just bear with us. You can switch them off as well with the button at the bottom of your screen if you wish to. Please note that the Q&A option is open, so if you think of some questions for Matthew during the talk, please do pop them in the Q&A, and Chris and Ian will be coming back to them towards the end of the session so that you can have some of your questions answered, so please do that. And we are recording this session, so for anyone who is missing it today or indeed wants to relive it again, it's going to be on YouTube for everybody. So without any more from me, I'm going to hand over. So I will turn off my camera now. But thank you again, Matthew, and welcome, and over to the panel.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Hi, everybody. Anne-Marie, thank you for that introduction. Greeting everyone. Is it possible, Anne-Marie, and I know we just talked about this, to switch the view so I can see the folks who are joining us today?
I don't think we can. I don't think we've got that option. I can certainly look into it, and if so, I'll come back.
Okay, no problem.
Now, okay?
Not a problem. Well, hi, everybody. I wish I was there in person, but we will make do with Zoom. I'd love to start with a very quick exercise that I will circle back to at the end. If you have a pen or pencil and a piece of paper, we're going to do a quick exercise. I am going to say one word, and if you could please write down the first image that pops into your mind. Okay, so I'm going to say the word, and you're not going to overthink this. There's no right or wrong answer. I'm going to say the word, and you're just going to either write it down or just think of the first image that comes to your mind. Sound good? Okay, so the word is idea. I say idea. What image popped into your mind? Now, we don't have, I'm going to have to ask you when we open it up at the end, but I used to ask this question as I traveled around the United Kingdom and as I travel around the United States. Almost every single one of us draws the exact same image. And I bet many of you did today. You drew a little light bulb, right? A little incandescent light bulb. And then almost all of us also draw the little lines emanating out from the light bulb just to prove that it is on. And again, when we draw this image, that light bulb is usually just floating all alone. It's not connected to anything at all. And I think this is kind of a visual cliche that we carry around in our heads. And of course, and what we'll get to at the end is that I don't think ideas are lit up light bulbs. I think at best, ideas are unlit light bulbs. And the things that ideas need to provide light are the same things that a old-fashioned incandescent light bulb needs, which are two things missing from that picture we all draw. And one is a source of power or energy, and the second is a connection. And the work, what I'm thinking about, struggling about, writing about, is how we light up the room, so to speak, and how we find new sources of energy, figuratively, and how we find connections to provide more light. Because I think too many places around our worlds do not have that source of power and do not have that connection. So I was thinking about being with you all today. It was almost 10 years ago to the day that I arrived in the United Kingdom. And think about 10 years ago, my predecessor as ambassador joked with me right before I arrived. And he said, Matthew, let me see here. I had the London 2012 Olympics, he said. I had a royal wedding and a Queen's Jubilee. And you're going to have the Scottish referendum, what became Brexit, and what he was sure to be, and he was right, a bitterly divisive 2016 presidential campaign back home in America. So sure enough, I arrive over here 10 years ago, and within the first week, 6 days after getting here, the Sun newspaper, you're familiar with that, above the fold, has a death notice for the special relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States. And what precipitated it at the time was Prime Minister Cameron had asked Parliament for the authorization of military force to deal with the civil war in Syria. Do you remember that? We were having similar debates back home. Anyway, Parliament did not grant him that authority. And therefore, and the perception was that the United States would have liked that because that would help us maybe make a similar decision back home, but it didn't happen. And so there was a gravestone on the front of the Sun, and it said, dead, special relationship, age 67, beloved offspring of FDR and Churchill, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Funeral to be held at the French embassy. I mean, it was funny. I don't think it's true, but it was funny. And the predecessor emailed me, said, well done, Matthew, 7 decades in the making, and you've killed it in less than 7 days. Now, of course, I don't think the special relationship was dead then. And I noticed that probably a couple times a year, it would be declared dead because some difference would arise between the United States and the United Kingdom. And maybe it wouldn't be on the front page above the fold with a death notice, but there would be articles written that it was dead. And I had a wonderful mentor, a 30-year U.S. Foreign Service professional, and she gave me great advice. And she said, when this headline hit 10 years ago, she said, don't worry, Matthew, do you know what the real job of a diplomat is? And I had done it once before in Sweden, but she was a real pro. And she said, look, think about a reservoir that exists between two countries, and it's a reservoir of trust and respect and understanding. And your job is to leave that reservoir just a little bit higher than you found it. Sometimes it'll be 1 cup at a time. Sometimes it'll be a whole barrel full, but that's the job. Focus on that. And I thought that was wise advice. And so soon after, the Pew Charitable Trust, who does great research around the world, issued a report about how young people viewed the United States. And they surveyed 40 countries. Think of all of what we used to call Western Europe, plus Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Brazil, South Africa, countries like that. In every single country, young people, which I think was people 18 to 25, had a higher opinion of the United States than their parents or grandparents. Some of it was attributed to President Obama's popularity. They didn't know exactly why, but that was true, except for one country where young people had a less favorable opinion, and you could probably imagine that country was the United Kingdom. So I thought, well, okay, there's an opportunity. How do we deal with that? And so, taking my mentor's advice, I knew the one thing I would not do, which was I was not going to go around the country and give a lecture about U.S. foreign policy. I had my wife and I had 3 teenagers at home, and so I knew enough about young people that wasn't going to be effective. So instead, I traveled around and I would do workshops at 6 foreign colleges, and I would give them an A5 card, blank, and a pencil from the embassy. And I would say, would you please draw for me an image or a word, if you don't want to draw an image or a word of something that frustrates, confuses, or concerns you about the United States and what we're up to. They would write it down, and then some brave soul would share what they had written for the group, and I would write it down. And so we spent 55 minutes of an hour talking about their frustrations. And if that's of interest, I can share with you at the end what they wrote down. In the last 5 minutes, I'd say, flip over the card, please, and write down one word about something that inspires you or gives you hope about the United States and what we're up to in the world. And they would. And I ended up doing that all over the UK, in York, in Leeds, in Leicester, in Liverpool, in Sheffield, Belfast, Edinburgh, Aberdeen, Newport, you name it. And it was always the same. It was always different, kind of in a way you'd expect, but also the same in a way. And by the end of my time, I had been to 200 schools, and I had 20,000 A5 cards with words and pictures of what frustrated these young people about America. And when I got home to the United States, I didn't have an excuse to go do that, but I loved learning from and listening to young people. So I kept it going in the US. In Kentucky, where I live, in Louisville, Kentucky, which, by the way, is twinned with Leeds. I don't think anyone in Leeds or Louisville knows this, but I know this. Anyway, so I'd keep that up. We changed it. I didn't ask the US kids about what frustrated them about the United Kingdom. I just asked them about their own country. And here's what I learned. The number one frustration and concern they had about their own country was division, racial, social, economic division, followed closely by loneliness. And then when they flipped over the card, what is one thing that inspires them about their own country? The number one most frequently written word was diversity, followed closely by freedom. So if you think about it, diversity and division, they have the same root. So what they inspired the most and made them the most uncomfortable had something to do with separateness. And as I dug a little deeper, what you realize, these young people, and I think this is true of all of us, regardless of age, they wanted to stand out as their own person and be part of something bigger than themselves, right? How can you stand out and fit in? And they felt too often that if they wanted to fit in, they had to be some subset of themselves. Or if they were going to stand out and be an individual, that meant that they had to be a loner, that they couldn't fit into something bigger. So they wanted unity without demanding uniformity. They wanted diversity without succumbing to division. And I was just back in London a few weeks ago. I started a business with a journalist there. And sure enough, yet again, the special relationship was declared dead. This time it was because the Biden administration had authorized the use of cluster munitions to give to the Ukrainians to fight back against Putin's aggression. And by the way, he's using cluster munitions against them. Not an easy decision for the Biden administration, and one that the Prime Minister of the UK publicly disagreed with. And so I was asked again about this special relationship, not in an official role, but And I said, you know what? I think there's the misunderstanding here. We don't do hard things together as countries, whether it's dealing with all the issues we deal with back to World War II, the Cold War, all the things that we work on together, supporting Ukraine as one example. We don't do hard things together because we're friends. We're friends because we do hard things together. And that this friendship is a byproduct, right? You can't make it directly. And if you go back to my mentor's advice about that reservoir of trust, respect, and understanding between our two countries, trust, respect, and understanding are like friendship too. And here's what I mean. And it's kind of a paradox, but we know it in our personal lives, that just like let's be friends, if I say to you, trust me, respect me, I have just decreased the likelihood that those things will happen, right? I mean, so if you aim directly for them, it'll backfire. They're only the result of other work. And this, I think, is tricky for governments, it's tricky for companies, it's tricky for institutes of higher education like YSJ, because you, as an organization, you like to directly think you can impact things. But these things we really value are the result of something else. And in this case, the result of hard work together. So I do not worry about the relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom. And the reason I don't worry about it is because I know there will be differences, like there are on cluster munitions, like there always have been, and that men and women from both countries will sit down at a table. Sometimes it's an official table like NATO, where we sit next to each other because of an accident of alphabet, United Kingdom, United States, when English dictates the seating pattern as opposed to French. But at all these tables, official and unofficial, where Brits and Americans sit down next to each other, not because of the alphabet, but because they want to, because they've done hard work together. And so I think about our official relationship, and I think we're going to have a steady supply of hard things to deal with. We have tables to sit around where we will hash through and work through our differences. We won't solve it once and for all, but we will resolve it as best we can. And then there'll be more hard problems, and we'll do that hard work again, resolve it as best we can, on and on and on. So I'm not worried about relationships between countries. What keeps me up at night, and I was talking with Chris and Ian and Anne-Marie beforehand, what keeps me up at night is not relations between our two countries, it's relations within our two countries. And just because we have united in our names, United Kingdom, United States, that is no guarantee that we will remain united. And so that's what I wrote the book about that Anne-Marie mentioned. I went and I thought, okay, with these young people's hopes and fears ringing in my ears, what are some good role models for leaders, some you've heard of, some you haven't, who thought differently about where to get a source of power and how to make connections so that people could stand out as themselves and fit into something greater. And that's what the book is about. And we can get into this in the Q&A. There's, and I'm mindful of our time, but there's the largest commercial organization in the history of the world was started with a mindset about power. It's actually Visa, a very unusual method of how you could compete and cooperate at the same time. Wikipedia was founded. It went up against one of the oldest companies in the world, Britannica. It went up against the richest company in the world at the time, which was Microsoft, that had started a competitor to Britannica called Encarta. Those of us of a certain age will remember that. And this service that charged nothing to users and paid nothing to contribute beat the oldest company in the world and the richest company in the world by thinking differently about power. And Alcoholics Anonymous, the largest recovery platform on the planet had a similar pattern. So too did the internet itself. So all these amazing world-changing innovations, and the leaders of them and their teams had a different view about power. They didn't think it was something you should lord over others. They didn't think it was something you should hoard to yourself. And they didn't think it was something you should divvy up in equal parcels and give out to everybody. Because all three of those things, as different as they are, they share in common an idea that power is a scarce resource. It is limited. These leaders said, no, 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 power is unlimited and you can make it. It's infinite. You can make it with other people sitting around a table if you have the right pattern and tone for how to do that. So I've been on the road, literal road, or like this, the Zoom road, for 2 years, talking to leaders of all kinds, their teams at high schools, at universities, at Fortune 500 companies, in government, all over, talking about this and listening to and learning from leaders. And I learned two big things. Number one, this idea of, they're all hungry for an alternative to zero-sum power. They are hungry for to emulate the kind of leaders I talk about in the book. So that's the good news. The bad news, and the second realization I had, was that we have an energy crisis. And what I mean by that is you talk to these leaders and their teams and they are tired, really tired. Hard to overestimate how tired they are. And as I dug, and I am the husband of a therapist and the son of a therapist, so in therapy, they use that wonderful phrase, unpack. So I said, okay, well, let's unpack. What's going on here? Why are you so tired? And there was a phrase in the book, my first book, that when I would follow up and ask for feedback resonated more than any others. And it was, pretending is exhausting. Pretending is exhausting. And when I dug a little bit, I found that there were really two modes of pretending that these leaders were engaged in. And the first type of pretending was pretending in service of, accomplishing the mission. And it was it involved a little bit of pretending, like I'll set the goal, I'll work backwards from there, I'll divvy out the tasks, that kind of mission. And at the first signs of real life, there's bumps in the plan. The leader could say, you know what, this isn't working, but they fall back on that, I think, bad graduation advice we were given when we were younger, which is fake it till you make it. So they fake it a little bit, and then they start to change their tone of voice, and they get more and more rigid. And if you had to summarize, and what starts out as, hey, let's all be aligned, kind of devolves into just toe the line. And so if you had to summarize that kind of pretending in one word, it is patronizing. And the tone these leaders take is patronizing, which, as you can imagine, doesn't make their team feel very good. And so there begins the second kind of pretending, which is pretending to boost morale. And so if a leader is told that their top-down tone of voice and top-down methods aren't working, they think, I'll do the opposite. I'll be bottom-up. And so they have all-hands meetings and they listen to all the ideas. And that usually creates a different kind of pretending, where at first it might feel good and they really want to listen to people. They might even go on a listening tour. You see our politicians all do this. But pretty soon, instead of wanting to really listen to people, you just want people to feel heard, and that's different. And so you got to pretend that all ideas are equally valid, even though you think they aren't, but you think you're not supposed to say that. And pretty soon the mission starts to slip, and then you go back into the other kind of pretending. And that's the cycle that I learned that these leaders are in, between patronizing, and if you had to summarize that second kind of pretending, let's pick the word pandering. So patronizing, pandering, chastising, cheerleading, same idea. And they cycle in a given day, in a given week, in a given year, between those two modes of pretending. And it's tiring them out. And when they really get tired, they say, you know what, I'll just sit it out. Right. So if we have to have another P word, from pandering to patronizing, it's a little harsh, but I think they get into pouting. Just pout and sit it out. And that's the kind of trap that they're in: pandering, patronizing, and pouting. Fight it out, hug it out, sit it out. And what I'm working on this new book, which is there's an alternative, and it's an alternative to how to escape that exhaustion trap. And I think of it, one more image for you. If you picture one of those 2x2 grids, you know those things? I'm not going to draw it for you, but you can draw it for yourself. So draw like a X like that. And on the northern part, write the word tension. And on the southern part, write the word no tension. And over here to the east, you can write the word constructive. And over on the west, write the word destructive. Right? So tension, no tension, constructive, destructive. And if you frame it that way, it's kind of a simple map. And you can see that in that upper left-hand corner, you've got destructive tension. That's where patronizing lives. That's where lots of cable news, the worst of Twitter, is there. When people get tired from that, they think, I'll do the opposite. That's where top-down lives. They go down to the opposite, constructive but no tension. That's where pandering lives. And they go back and forth between those, as we said. And then when they get frustrated, they go to the lower left and really tired, sit it out, no tension, destructive. And that's where you can vent, feels better for a little bit. But here's the problem: you're venting, but there's no ventilation. And you start hanging out with other people who have all the same complaints you have. That starts to be like an echo chamber where you breathe your own exhaust. And breathing your own exhaust is no cure for exhaustion. So if you take the upper left, the lower left, and the lower right, that forms your kind of triangle of sadness. And of course, the way to escape it is to be in that upper right-hand quadrant, which is constructive tension, which is how do we deal with difference? We don't dodge difference down here when we're pandering. We don't discount difference up there when we're patronizing and ignoring people and making people conform. And we certainly don't demonize difference, which has happened when we sit it out and only hang out with people who agree with us. We need to deal with it and deal with it constructively. And that's what the leaders that we emulate and have built world-changing environments do. It's what the United States and the United Kingdom do when they are sitting around a table together. And my hope, and I'll end it here, is that we can find more places, whether it's in York or in Louisville or in Leicester, Leeds, or any of these wonderful cities and towns in the United Kingdom, in the United States, where we can gather at a table together with difficult things to work through, and we bring a pattern and tone of how to deal with difference constructively. And if we do that, it will not only re-energize ourselves, it will provide a source of energy and a source of connection that can light up these cities and towns, as it were. And that's what I'm focused on and working on now, and would love to open it up now for Ian and for Chris and for others to share your reactions to that, and would love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you very much for that. Before I bring Ian in, I'd just like to remind everybody that the Q&A function is open. Please do get your questions in. We'll try to get through as many of those as possible. So please type them in. I'll then read them out and ask Matthew to answer them. I've been told nothing's off limits, so please do get those questions in. Thank you. Over to you, Ian.
Hi, Matthew. If I may, I'd like to. I've got a couple of questions off the bat, which I think I'd like to ask. And if I may, I'd like to go back, I think, to the early part of your talk, and back to your experience as a diplomat, especially a diplomat in the United Kingdom. The obvious question would be a question about the special relationship and what happened to the special relationship, good or bad, around about the time of the Obama administration and your work as a diplomat in the UK. But I don't think I'm going to ask about that, because it seems to me from your talk that actually, to a large extent, we're on the same page with regard to the special relationship. My feeling about it is that I'm not altogether sure one should call it a special relationship, but because it's sometimes criticized as that's a term which just kind of explains a British neediness that has to be kind of fulfilled by kind words from American politicians every so often. But it does seem to me that over the years, and it's still the case, that we obviously have more shared interests than not shared interests. And we obviously have such a reservoir of history and shared culture together that you, and in fact, you asked early on, before we started this, you asked about, what was it that people didn't worry about? It might be useful to find that out. And well, it occurs to me that I don't think I worry about the special relationship, because I think that's pretty much fixed, at least into the long term, as far as I can see. But I am struck by the fact that during your period as ambassador in the UK, people suggested, in just the way that you've said, well, the special relationship's dead. It took a number of knocks, and a couple of things that occurred to me was, I think one thing was there was as a result of the Great Recession, as people tend to call it these days, there was a kind of austerity. Well, it was an austerity budget in the UK, but that included an austerity defense budget, which I suspect didn't go down that well with the United States. And then there is also that issue which you mentioned about David Cameron's inability to carry Parliament with him about the Syria issue. And then, of course, there's Brexit, which clearly was not a policy which President Obama was entirely enthusiastic about. And of course, also about half the British population wasn't enthusiastic about it either. But what I do wonder is, what is your take on what these things did to Britain's status, aside from the special relationship? How do you think Britain's global status fared at the time of the Obama administration, and then maybe subsequently?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I mean, here's just the first part first, you know me, I love images, right? So picture the most simple Venn diagram of two circles overlapping and not fully overlapping. By the way, does everyone know where Venn diagrams? It's John Venn, the mathematician from Hull. Maybe Grimsby, I don't know. I once confused the two, and I won't make that mistake again, although maybe I just did. Anyway, I have used a lot of Venn diagrams in my day. Think about everyone on this Zoom. Think about in your own personal, professional life, one circle is people you need to deal with for whatever reason, childcare, your work, okay, those people. Another circle is people you love to work with. And so it's pretty magic if the people in the overlap of people you need to work with and like to work with. And I'm not saying the US and the UK are the only people in that overlap when you talk about countries, but there's lots of countries we have to deal with that we don't love dealing with. There's a bunch of countries we love to deal with, we don't really have to deal with that much. So that's one simple way of framing how the countries get along. But again, I had this disagreement with a wonderful, brilliant British journalist who we were together when Prime Minister Sunak had just come back from meeting with President Biden in Washington, and they had announced, you'll remember this, I'm a little blurry on the timing, maybe it was June, that they were going to sync up on AI regulation. Do you remember this? There was some announcement about something. And this smart journalist sort of said, great, it's the UK being into regulation. I wish we'd be into innovation. And it was clever. I mean, it was sort of like okay, I see the difference. But I lovingly, I hope, challenged him. And I said, well, wait a minute, those aren't mutually exclusive. And think about the United Kingdom and the United States and the thing, just to go way back. I mean, from Magna Carta to our Declaration of Independence to your unwritten Constitution, our written one, we have been innovators in regulation. And regulation is not nothing. As you look around at some of the stuff that concerns all of us about deteriorating norms and methods around democracy around the world, even at home, it is precisely because we haven't lost the energy and the excitement to mend and amend rules of a game we love. Right? It would be weird if you devoted your life to the laws of cricket and then you didn't love cricket, right? Or that you loved to play cricket, but you hated the rules. It's like, well, cricket is only the rules. I mean, or else you're just a bunch of people running around on grass. So somehow we've gotten confused and we think that the rules of the game and the game are different. Like, this is what we signed up for, and mending and amending them is the hard work that we need to do. And the differences we have, and Ian, you named a number of them, aren't, again, they're not differences we should dodge, we should discount or demonize. The only source of growth and the only source of energy is difference. If everybody agreed all the time, you don't go anywhere. Think about a loving spousal or, partner relationship. You don't solve it once and for all. How depressing. You have issues, difficult ones, you resolve them. You evolve as a result of having resolved them as best you can in dark pencil, and then you resolve them again, and you evolve, and you resolve and evolve. And that's what our countries do together. It's what we need to be better at in our towns and cities, resolving and evolving and not getting locked into this solve it. And maybe the final image I'd leave you with is this terrible phrase, and I probably said it 1,000 times, always in sort of a patronizing tone of voice. And British and American diplomats say this: there is no daylight between the United States and the United Kingdom as it relates to fill in the blank, commitment to 2% spending for NATO defense budgets, the blah, 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 anything. And think about that for a moment. What a ludicrous standard of agreement. No daylight between us, as if we are monolithic. Think about a British and American soldier in World War II standing shoulder to shoulder. There's daylight between them. A loving couple on a dance floor. There's daylight between them. I mean, any image of partnership you can think of, there is daylight between them, and it would be creepy and ineffective if there weren't. We don't need monolithic things. We need daylight between us.
Thank you. If I could just extend that a little bit, then as I suggested, well, I don't think I put it like this, but some people put it like this at the time, that Britain was kind of resigning its status as a global power, and I wonder what you thought about that, whether that was the case at the time, or it has continued to be the case or not.
I mean, I just don't see it that way. Back to the point on AI regulation, I think about, and I think I love sport. I think I'm not alone on this Zoom. Certainly our two countries love sport. And I don't mean sport as a diversion from difficulties that we have to deal with in our daily lives. I mean, as a microcosm, as I mentioned, of mending and amending rules of a game we love. If you love the game, you know the game needs to change. Look how the rules of football have changed. And cricket, just to pick two. Americans can relate to the football, soccer part. We're clueless about cricket. But actually, it's growing in America in exciting ways. But if we talk about sport, I think we can find more helpful patterns for how we think about what it is to lead. And I think sometimes, Ian, those characterizations, I think, are a sort of lording power over people view of what matters in the world. Nobody likes to have power lorded over them. Nobody. And what that really is just bullying. And look, our country's been a bully. Your country's been a bully in our history. I get that. That is not us at our best. Hoarding power to yourself is no better. So I think the UK, I think people who write off or reduce the UK's role are being short-sighted and silly, because it is an incredible engine of creativity, of so many things. And just, I mean, and you know, and I mean, think about the back to football, just this, it's the world's game that unite. I mean, it's the thing that everybody loves, pulls into their country, does it in its own way. And I think on a series of things, back to AI regulation, there's an amazing role that the UK can continue to play in a whole range of areas.
Thanks again, Matthew. I'm sure I agree with you, although I'm not sure the rules of cricket are changing for the better. Although I still watch 2020, even though I don't like the idea. But if I can, Chris, can I just ask one more question? Okay, thanks. Clearly, you're an optimist, Matthew, and you know, you talked about getting away from, you know, patronizing and pandering and pretending, and trying to operate in that useful space on your diagram on the top right, in the top right corner. How do you think that's likely to how possible is it that kind of optimistic view will play out in the United States, where I think there are, just as there are in the UK, very serious political problems, which at the moment seem to have kind of divided the United States down the middle?
Totally. I mean, I struggle with the word optimism. I think I know what you mean. I'm certainly, so if you think back to that grid, I think optimism is caricatured, sometimes very deservedly, and sort of not co-opted, but it is often the people most likely to use that word are people dwelling in the lower right-hand corner of sort of group hug, why can't we all get along? They'll carry signs literally or figuratively that say, we need bridges, not walls. What unites us is greater than what divides us. And I think, well, I don't know. You leave that rally, you're going back to a home with 4 walls and a roof. You like those walls. Walls have a role. Bridges have a role. You can build a bridge to nowhere that's useless, and you can have walls that are destructive, but you can have walls that are really helpful and bridges that are helpful. We should judge them by their fruits. I think optimism is also misunderstood as sort of, why can't we all get along? And to the point I hope I made earlier, it's like, I don't think, how boring. If we all get along, it's dead. It's like, if you solve something once and for all, it's like a dissected frog in high school biology class. It's accurate, it's precise, it's dead. We need vibrant, we have to deal with difference constructively and seek out difference and integrate difference into a bigger conception, and then integrate more difference. And so there's this wonderful woman we didn't have time to get into, but I'll give a very quick highlight. Many people here would have heard of Peter Drucker, who is probably the number one quoted leadership guru of the last century. And Harvard Business Review they asked 200, it was a bunch of Brits, Americans, Australia, business gurus all around the world, who is your guru? And they published the list of gurus' guru. Number one was Peter Drucker. Not surprising. What was surprising was a couple of years before he died, he revealed that he had a guru, and she was nowhere on that list. And her name was Mary Parker Follett, 1868 to 1933, a gay woman from Boston, where I grew up, born right after our Civil War. And he said she had every good leadership idea, he said, came from her, but she's been erased from history. And she had this very practical advice that I think, Ian, gets to your question. And she said, look, there's 4 outcomes from a meeting, and only one of them is worthwhile. And this maps to the little grid too. Bad outcome number 1, you try to win the meeting. Like you come in with an idea fully formed and try to get everyone else to say yes. She's like, well, that's stupid. Why is anyone else there? Bad outcome number 2, you acquiesce and you say, well, Chris seems really fired up. We'll let him, or Anne-Marie, we'll let them win the day. It's like, no. Why are you at the meeting? Bad outcome number 3 is compromise, which many of us were told is a good thing. And she said, I don't think so. And if you get biblical for a moment, I think King Solomon, it's sort of compromise in the half a baby sense. It's fair, but dead. So she thinks compromise is just little mini victories and mini acquiescences. So the only reason she thinks we should ever gather around a table, actual table or a Zoom table like today, is to make something together. Co-creation is the fancy word. And if you make something with another group of people, it might strike you as mundane, but it's actually magic, which is you make this thing. It might be a product. It might be a product roadmap. It might be a decision. It might be a determination. It doesn't really matter. But the act of making it with others, you didn't enter that meeting with that thing in your mind fully formed, but you're leaving that meeting with that thing you made is for always part of you. You are forever part of it. So you're just a little bit changed as a result of that interaction. And that's how you can get into this resolve and evolve mindset. And that's what I think each of us can bring to our next meeting, is that pattern and tone of seeking out difference and trying to make something out of it. So I think of it, I used to write a little cheat sheet at the embassy. I would say, I think 3 things that we can bring into our lives based on Mary Parker Follett, this amazing woman who's been erased. Spent a lot of time in London, by the way. 3 things. Expect to be needed, right? No one else can be you. Expect to need others. That's why you're having a meeting. And then the third one is expect to be changed. So expect to be needed, expect to need others, expect to be changed. And if we bring that into our lives, I think we can get into this habit of making. And that's where power and energy, back to the unlit light bulb, that's where you get power, make power together, and connect it and light up the room.
I hope you're right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Matthew, for that. We've got some questions coming in. I'll try and get through as many as possible. I am very conscious of the time element. We got a couple of questions sort of about the opposite of what you've been talking about, opposite of that quadrant, if you like, with democratic governments or political parties in elections trying to use division to win elections or to stoke up tensions. And we can think of Donald Trump and fake news in the US. We can think of the so-called culture wars in the UK. And essentially, Matthew, the question I'm going to ask, I'm going to paraphrase some of these, is what should our response to that be? Or what do you think the response to that should be, please?
Sure. Two thoughts. For sure that is happening. our red and blue are switched in America and the UK, but for the purposes of this comment, it sort of doesn't matter because it's not party political. But if you think about red and blue not getting along, and I'll talk about my country's capital in Washington, D.C., I once got a similar question of like, well, okay, with so much division and each side saying awful things about the other, can you imagine them sitting at a Mary Parker Follett style table and working through their differences constructively? And I said, look, I'll never give up on that. That seems fairly difficult to imagine right now. But I said, here's I think, much less hard to imagine, except what the truth is, and I can again speak to America, but I'm sure it's true here. I mean, sorry, there in the UK as well. Some of the nastiest meetings take place when just the blue team or just the red team is sitting at a table with themselves. So the pattern and tone we take in trying to win the meeting and division within a tribe, so to speak, the better pattern could start right there. Forget red and blue getting along. What if the blue team or the red team embrace difference constructively, embrace tension constructively the way that we're talking about? That doesn't seem like a crazy thing to ask. And if it could begin there, that would be a good thing. And I love sport. And we can translate it for York and for the UK, but I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, so we love baseball, not cricket. And there's the Boston Red Sox and the New York Yankees, and they hate each other, okay? A very famous rivalry. So there is a men's public restroom somewhere on Interstate I-95 between Boston and New York. And next to the mirror, someone has scrawled in ballpoint pen, "Yankees suck." And someone scratched it out and wrote "Red Sox suck." And they scratched that out and wrote "Yankees suck." Okay, can you imagine? So it's like 18 inches of this back and forth bickering on the bathroom wall. Along comes a guy, I assume it was a guy. He circles the whole screed in green Sharpie, and then he writes in green Sharpie, "And we all love baseball." Now, there's kind of like a split moment where you're like, oh, like, but there's something kind of condescending and not very useful about what Mr. Green Sharpie did. And if we go back to our grid for a moment, the Red Sox Yankees suck stuff is upper left-hand corner, kind of tribal destructive tension, right? Mr. Green Sharpie comes along and says, "Group hug, we all love baseball." He's sort of pandering. He's down in the lower right. I think, in an answer to this person's question, what I think we ought to do, because Mr. Green Sharpie didn't settle anything. In fact, if you went back there, I think there would be further commentary on where Mr. Green Sharpie can put his pen. Because of that kind of condescending tone, I would go back with a purple, just to pick a diplomatic color, a purple Sharpie, and I would write, and this is kind of an obscure baseball reference, so forgive me, should the American League, which is the league they're both in, should the American League eliminate the designated hitter rule? ? Now, all of a sudden, you're going to the upper right-hand quadrant. I don't know. It's tricky. What do you think? You could have Red Sox and Yankees fans finding themselves on the same side of wanting to eliminate it or on the same side of wanting to keep it. They would be engaged in mending and amending rules of a game they love. So I think it's at that altitude, not way up high and abstract where no one really lives, or down in the trenches of trench warfare, but pick our heads up just a little bit about mending and amending rules of the game we love. In that case, an actual game, but in our democracy, the arrangements we have to make to deal with disease and immigration and all the things that we are never going to solve once and for all, but we can do our best to try to resolve in dark pencil.
Thank you. Thank you. I noticed there's some people with their hands up. Unfortunately, we don't have the function, as far as I know, to take verbal questions from the audience, but if you type questions into the Q&A function, I will disseminate them on your behalf. So hopefully for those with the hands up, we will get to them. I want to return now to your experience as a diplomat, and I've got a question here asking, what do you feel from your time as ambassador to the UK or your wider role in the diplomatic service had the biggest impact, and why?
Yeah, without a question, I think if I heard that correctly, in my diplomatic time, and I got to work with these amazing career foreign service people who do it for 35 years. Every 3 years, they move themselves and often their families all around the world doing this great work. British system, very the same. We have a strange one where people like me are parachuted in from outside of diplomacy. About 25% of our ambassadors are like that. So whenever I answer a foreign diplomacy question, I like to remind that I was very proud of the work I did. I learned a lot, but I'm sort of an amateur diplomat asked to go do this role. By far, the most impactful thing I did was the 20,000 A5 cards with 18-year-old British young women and young men. And the big learning I got, and I would make all those responses into a word cloud. Do you know what, so the most frequent word would be the biggest, and I would just carry it around in my suit. I wore suits and ties back then, and carry it around. And I would show it to Secretary of State John Kerry. I would show it to President Obama when he came to visit. I'd show it to every single person. And it was two-sided. One had all the things that frustrated them about America. So remember, I said I have 20,000 index cards here at home. 10,000 of those cards have the exact same drawing on them. So the word cloud has one word that is bigger than anything, and it is guns. So 10,000 of these students drew a nearly identical handgun. And that's just, so it was guns, racism, police brutality. Those were, I could be at a majority minority school in East London. I could be at Eton or Harrow. I could be in Belfast. It's always the same. Guns, racism, police brutality. And then what I color-coded the card. And so guns, racism, police brutality, healthcare would all be in red. And then Israel, Palestine would be in blue. Surveillance, Edward Snowden would be in blue. Those kinds of things. And so it was kind of subtle, but the red were things that we think are domestic issues, and blue are things that we think diplomats like me ought to be talking about because they're foreign policy issues. And I say, great, look, we can make that distinction, what is foreign and what is domestic, but that's not a difference. Domestic policy is foreign policy because that's what's concerning. And if 18-year-old British people, if we start to pull apart and don't understand or aren't committed to try to engage with each other's differences, that's really where the future of the special relationship lives. And so that to me was a great reminder. Oh, and by the way, let's spend only 5 minutes of the hour talking about the happy stuff, which, by the way, was diversity, opportunity, freedom, food, sport, music. Great. But you learn much more talking about differences. I mean, your gun culture and our gun culture could not be more different. And I don't think British people are ever going to understand gun. And there are things we'll never fully understand about you guys. And that's fine. We're not trying to be one circle. We just need to be a Venn diagram with plenty in the overlap.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate the time constraint with this. So this might be a short answer. And I also appreciate before we were talking as a panel, and Matthew, you said you don't really have a great deal to say on the current conflict in the Middle East. But as you can imagine, we've got a lot of questions on this, and I think it would be remiss of me if I didn't answer these. I'll try and summarise these together, and I think the one I'll go for is there anything that could have been done, looking back on this from a historical prospect? Was there anything else that could have been done in this region during your time, during Obama's presidency, to maybe reduce the tensions in the Middle East, or to produce some?
Oh, you just froze, Chris, but I think I got the. Look, I don't know. Ian, am I still coming through?
Sorry, I cut there. To produce a different outcome was essentially what I was getting at.
I don't know. I mean, it's not my area of expertise, that part of the world. There are lots of people better. I think I'm reminded of when I went to go serve in Sweden. A wonderful, seasoned Swedish diplomat came up to me. I think I'd been there 1 month, and he said, you Americans, all you want to talk about when we have these official meetings is the war on terror, and then the war on terror. And he's like, look, I get it. They struggled with the same fears that we all did in the United States and the United Kingdom. But he said, you know what? We can worry about more than one thing at a time. And I wish you would talk more about Russia and what's going on over there. And they, of course, I think that, Sweden and Russia have fought 300 wars in their history together. Right? It's like, wow. Okay. So, and based on where they're located, they never took their eye off of what's going on there. And so it is, I think it is really important to, and the visual I have is, in each of us, it's easier to sort of point fingers out there to leaders, like, how are we in our own, the things we control? If you remember, I don't know what driver's education is like in the United Kingdom, but the Swedes take safe driving very seriously. And so I got to go see the Swedish safe driving school, and they have head-mounted displays of everyone driving. And it is crazy what people do in a car. They have like real life people who are basically just reading their phones in their laps while they're driving. And so it shows you a little red X every place wherever they're looking. And so it surprises no one that if you are distracted driving and you're looking in your lap and not at the road, it will kill you, right? No surprise there. Here's what's surprising. If you do the opposite of that and you look at the road ahead and only the road ahead, that'll kill you too. And it's called tunnel vision. So if you focus, and that little red X never moves from the front where you're looking, it's incredibly dangerous. And so what we were told when we were 16, 17, 18 is very true in our lives today, which is you need to keep, by all means, look at the road ahead of you, but then check the rear view mirror, the side view mirror, way down the road, a little to the left. That little red X, which shows where your eyes should be, moving every 2 seconds. And that, I think, in our foreign policy, we can be distracted drivers, and then we overcompensate and we get incredibly focused, and neither is helpful. We need, and by the way, what they call the safe driving is called engaged driving. And that's, I think, each of us as citizens, or if you're in leadership positions, being able to sort of take that same language and body language of being aware, but not overly focused and not distracted.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And apologies for cutting out while I was asking that question. I think we have come to the end of the discussion. I'd like to thank Matthew for being very generous with his time, for coming to speaking to us today, and for engaging on issues of leadership. I'd also like to thank Ian Horwood for acting as discussant in the panel, and I'd like to thank everybody for joining this seminar. Thank you, everybody, and I hope to see you again at one of these events soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Ian. Thanks, Emery. Thank you, everybody.